One day in 2015, in a remote mountain village in Gokseong, South Korea, an extremely bizarre murder occurred. The victims were a married couple, farmers who cultivated ginseng in the village. Both were stabbed more than 20 times and died in their own home. Based on witness statements, the police quickly apprehended the suspect, Mr. Park, also from the same village. Evidence at the scene indicated that Mr. Park first killed the husband in his own home. He then stuffed the body into a sack, dragged it to the victim's house, and finally killed the wife there as well. What puzzled people was that when arrested, Mr. Park's face was covered in festering sores, and he appeared distraught, with his eyes wide and vacant, as if possessed. When the police searched Mr. Park's residence, they found a bunch of dried snapdragon flowers hanging on the porch. In Korean folklore, goldfish grass is not only considered to have cooling and anti-inflammatory properties, but also to ward off evil spirits and demons. The cluster of goldfish grass hanging on Mr. Park's porch seemed to be a way to prevent evil spirits from entering the house. But the scene in his bedroom was even more terrifying. A black crow's carcass lay on the floor. The bed looked like a giant bird's nest, surrounded by several pale white candles. The room was completely unlike the living space of an ordinary person. Because the suspect was unconscious, the police had to take him to the hospital for emergency treatment. Doctors examined him and found traces of poisonous mushrooms in his stomach. Furthermore, there was absolutely no personal animosity between Mr. Park and the victim's couple. Therefore, the police initially concluded that Mr. Park had accidentally eaten poisonous mushrooms, leading to his madness and subsequent murder. That evening, while on night duty at the police station, Officer Jong-gu and his colleague Il-gwon discussed the case. Il-gwon suggested that Mr. Park's actions were instigated by evil spirits. However, being an atheist, Jong-gu didn't seem bothered by this theory. Il-gwon then told him about a rumor circulating in the village. Not long ago, a village hunter had hunted a deer on a nearby mountain. While carrying the deer down the mountain, the hunter accidentally slipped and fell down a slope, collapsing unconscious. When he woke up, he suddenly saw a man wearing only a loincloth devouring the deer he had just hunted. Seeing the hunter regain consciousness, the man crawled towards him. Only then did the hunter recognize him as the Japanese man who had moved there a few months earlier. Perhaps due to the language barrier, this Japanese man had never communicated with the villagers before. He usually lived alone in the deep forest nearby. It was said that the villagers occasionally saw him going down to the riverbank at the foot of the mountain to fish. At this moment, the Japanese man's eyes were bloodshot, his face covered in blood, looking exactly like a terrifying demon. The hunter was immediately frightened and fainted again. When he regained consciousness, the Japanese man had vanished without a trace. He returned home in a state of panic. From then on, he never dared to go hunting in the mountains again. The villagers began spreading rumors that the Japanese man was a demon and would bring misfortune to the village. This rumor gave Il-gwon an unsettling feeling that the case of Mr. Park murdering the farmer couple might connected to the mysterious Japanese man. How Jong-gu dismissed Il-gwon's speculation as nonsense. He believed the case was actually quite simple. Mr. Park had simply gone mad after accidentally eating poisonous mushrooms and committed the murders. Just as Jong-gu and Il-gwon were debating the case, a sudden clap of thunder echoed outside. The police station was plunged into darkness by the power outage. Then, under the flickering lightning outside, Jong-gu and Il-gwon vaguely saw a naked woman standing in front of the police station's glass door. But in the blink of an eye, she vanished like a ghost. That night, Jong-gu had nightmares. It seemed that the recent murders concealed some sinister truth. The next morning, to relax his mind, Jong-gu took his daughter Hyojin to the riverbank to play. He inadvertently spotted the Japanese man from the rumors fishing on the opposite bank. He didn't seem unusual at all. Clearly, the villagers' rumors were untrue. Unexpectedly that evening, another strange death occurred in the village. A villager named Lee's house suddenly burst into flames. After the fire was extinguished, police unearthed 3 charred bodies at the scene. The deceased were Lee, his mother, and his son. Meanwhile, his wife, though not burned to death, had completely gone mad, biting anyone she encountered. While Jong-gu was examining the scene, Lee's wife lunged at him, pinned him to the ground, and bit him. Fortunately, other police officers at the scene managed to pull her away in time, preventing more serious consequences. As Jong-gu got up from the ground, he noticed the Japanese man who had been fishing that morning. At that moment, he stood with a cold, gloomy expression amidst the onlookers. When Jong-gu's eyes met the man's, his heart pounded with fear. Back at the police station, Jong-gu finally remembered Lee's wife, the woman who had bitten him. She seemed to be the naked woman standing outside the police station the previous night. The next morning, Jong-gu intended to check on Lee's wife to see if she had recovered her composure, but received news that she had hanged herself from a large tree outside their house. The other victims hadn't died in the fire, but had been stabbed to death. The police quickly found the murder weapon and only found found Lee's wife's fingerprints on it. This meant that it was highly likely that after going mad, she had stabbed her family to death and then set the house on fire. Perhaps after regaining her senses and being unable to accept the truth, she ultimately chose death. During the subsequent investigation, Jong-gu obtained a clue from a familiar butcher shop owner that Lee's wife had previously been sexually assaulted by a Japanese man. Since then, her mental state had become unstable. She frequently ran around naked in the middle of the night. Someone had seen her body covered in terrifying, blinding sores. The butcher shop owner also believed that the Japanese man had brought misfortune to the village. Jong-gu remained skeptical of this claim. That afternoon, while he was on guard duty at the crime scene, a mysterious woman approached him and struck up a conversation. The mysterious woman wore a white dress and a poorly fitting green men's jacket, and her face looked quite unusual, unlike that of the local people. She kept muttering mysteriously to Jong-gu that the Japanese man living in the mountains was a demon. Lee's wife was so bewitched by him that she went mad and killed her own family. Recently, Jong-gu had been seeing this Japanese man frequently. This showed that he had also been bewitched. Jong-gu naturally didn't believe her words. However, he still called Il-guan, asking him to bring the mysterious woman to the police station for questioning. Unexpectedly, after Jong-gu made the call, he discovered the mysterious woman had long since disappeared. At the same time, a slight commotion came from the burnt-out backyard of the Lee family's house. Jong-gu followed the sound to the backyard to investigate. He found the Japanese man wearing only a loincloth and gnawing on a dead deer. Upon noticing Jong-gu, the man, with bloodshot eyes, advanced towards him. Terrified, Jong-gu turned and ran, but tripped over a rock. The Japanese man, seizing the opportunity, lunged at Jong-gu, his mouth full of blood. Jong-gu, in a state of extreme panic, suddenly woke up. It turned out to be just a nightmare. After waking up, he found his daughter lying ill in bed with a high fever, unable to go to school. He thought she only had a cold and didn't worry too much. Il-guan said that last night, Jong-gu had actually called him, asking him to come to the Lee family's crime scene to bring a mysterious woman back to the police station for questioning. Only then did Jong-gu realize that seeing the mysterious woman at the crime scene wasn't a dream. Only the sight of the Japanese man gnawing on the deer carcass in the Lee family's backyard was a hallucination. He never imagined that reality and dreams could be so closely intertwined. Since they couldn't find the mysterious woman, Jong-gu and Il-guan decided to go directly to the mountain to investigate the truth about the Japanese man. Later, the two men sought out the hunter who had encountered the Japanese man to ask for guidance. Although the hunter was still frightened by his previous experience, under the coercion of Jong-gu and Il-guan, he led them deep into the forest. Passing by the hillside where the hunter had met the Japanese man, the three discovered the carcass of a wild deer. Clearly visible were human skin marks on it. It seemed the hunter's experience of seeing the Japanese man gnawing on the deer carcass was not just a rumor, but a reality. At this moment, upon seeing the carcass, the hunter immediately decided to turn back the way he came. Just then, a heavy rain began to fall. As the hunter turned to leave, he was struck by lightning. Seeing this, Jong-gu and Il-guan rushed the injured hunter to the hospital for emergency treatment. After settling the hunter in the hospital, they suddenly heard a commotion coming from the ward on the upper floor. When they went upstairs to check on him, they saw the first suspect in the murder case still spitting up blood. His whole body was convulsing, and the bones in his body were making ear-piercing cracking sounds with each convulsion. The medical team had never witnessed anything like this before. They could only stand there in shock, watching the suspect die suddenly on the spot. Jong-gu and Il-guan were also terrified by the horrific scene before them. After leaving the hospital, the two went to a small bar to drink to calm their nerves. During that time, Jong-gu accidentally saw a barmaid wearing a woolen coat. She had pustules on her neck, exactly like those on the suspect's face. However, due to his confused state of mind and the fact that he had drunk quite a lot, Jong-gu didn't approach to ask about the pustules on her body. After drinking and returning home, he discovered that his daughter not only hadn't recovered from her fever, but was also convulsing and delirious. She kept insisting that someone was trying to break down the door and enter the house. With Jong-gu's comforting words and patience, she gradually calmed down and fell asleep. The next morning, Jong-gu found Hyojin miraculously recovered. However, she had started eating indiscriminately. Even meat and fish, which she normally never touched, she ate with relish. Jong-gu's mother-in-law suspected her granddaughter had been possessed by an evil spirit and planned to find a sorcerer to perform an exorcism. Although Jong-gu didn't really believe in ghosts and spirits, he didn't object to his mother-in-law's suggestion. After work, he decided to continue his search for the Japanese man with Il-guan. This time, Illinois Guang brought his nephew, Yangja, as an assistant. Yangja was a Catholic and also an assistant at the local church. It was said that he was very fluent in Japanese and could act as an interpreter when communicating with with the Japanese man. After searching through the forest for a while, the three finally found the Japanese man's detached wooden house on the mountaintop. The Japanese man wasn't home. A large black dog was tied outside, barking furiously. Jong-gu and Il-guan took this opportunity to circle around the dog and sneak into the wooden house to search for clues. Yang stayed outside to keep watch in case the Japanese man suddenly returned. Jong-gu quickly discovered an altar with a goat's head and candles in one of the rooms of the wooden house. Meanwhile, Illinois Guan found a dark, cramped room. The walls were plastered with photographs of crime scenes, including 2 recent murders. In addition, a pile of personal belongings of the villagers was stacked in the corner of the dark room. Among them was a small white shoe bearing the name of Jong-gu's daughter. Il-guan was stunned by the sight before him. Just then, the large black dog outside the door suddenly broke free from its leash and lunged towards Yang, who was standing guard. Hearing the commotion inside the house, Jong-gu panicked and rushed outside. However, having nothing to defend themselves against the ferocious dog, they were completely helpless. Fortunately, at the critical moment, the Japanese man returning from outside managed to subdue the black dog in time. Seeing strangers in his house, the man said nothing but calmly asked the 3 to leave. The group of 3 reluctantly retreated down the mountain. On the way back, Illinois Guan recounted his findings in the dark room to Jong-gu and the priest Yang. He became even more convinced that the Japanese man was the mastermind behind the 2 murders. He believed the man had used the victim's personal belongings to subdue the turtles, causing them to become mentally unstable and turn into murderers. As he spoke, Illinois Guan handed Jong-gu the small white shoe he had taken from the dark room. He suspected that Jong-gu's daughter might be the next victim. With a single glance, Jong-gu recognized the shoe as his daughter's. Connecting this to Hyojin's unusual behavior over the past 2 days, Jong-gu suspected that the Japanese man was likely the mastermind. After rushing home, he asked Hyojin if she had met the Japanese man privately recently. Hyojin admitted she had indeed met him, but when Jong-gu asked where, Hyojin suddenly went berserk and started screaming. That night, while his daughter was asleep, Jong-gu quietly went to her room and looked through her diary. He discovered it was filled with dark, bizarre drawings. In his horror, Jong-gu recalled how the suspect Park and the Lee family, when they went mad and committed murder, had strange, pus-filled sores on their bodies. So he cautiously lifted his daughter's nightgown to examine it. Unexpectedly, similar pustules had also appeared on Hyojin's thigh. Just as Jong-gu was bewildered and didn't know what to do, Hyojin suddenly woke up from her sleep, screaming hysterically. She even used vicious words to curse her father, as if possessed by an evil spirit. Jong-gu's wife and mother-in-law heard the screaming and rushed to see what was happening. While Jong-gu was trying to comfort his daughter, his mother-in-law pulled him aside and claimed that she had invited a powerful sorcerer to the house to perform an exorcism. However, the sorcerer was quite busy lately and wouldn't be able to come for another 2 days. Jong-gu still didn't believe that his daughter's condition was related to ghosts. When morning came, he took his daughter to see a doctor, but the doctor examined her repeatedly but couldn't explain why Hyojin had pus-filled sores on her body. Having exhausted all other options, police officer Jong-gu called Yang Jae, who spoke Japanese, and they once again went to the Japanese man's residence. Jong-gu instructed Yang Jae to ask the Japanese man in Japanese if he had used black magic to curse Hyojin. However, the Japanese man remained silent. Losing patience, Jong-gu stormed into the wooden house to find evidence. He discovered that the altar, as well as the photographs and objects in the dark room, had vanished without a trace. A surge of unwarranted rage welled up inside Jong-gu. He grabbed a hoe and smashed the front door and windows of the wooden house, threatening the Japanese man not to act rashly again. But the Japanese man coldly watched Jong-gu's actions. However, his large black dog suddenly lashed out and lunged at Jong-gu. In self-defense, Jong-gu killed the dog with the hoe. Finally, he uttered harsh words and gave the Japanese man 3 days to leave. Otherwise, Jong-gu will beat him to death just like he beat this black dog to death. Afterward, Jong-gu and Yang Jae left. Early the next morning, Jong-gu was awakened by his wife's frantic screams. It turned out someone had hung a black goat with its throat cut in front of their house. In his fear and anger, Jong-gu accidentally fell. He immediately felt numbness throughout his body, and then he couldn't move anymore. His wife and mother-in-law had to entrust Hyojin to a neighbor's care. Later, they took Jong-gu to the hospital for acupuncture treatment. Fortunately, Jong-gu didn't suffer any major complications. After a few needles, he quickly regained his mobility. However, when the 3 returned from the hospital, they found Hyojin once again in a frenzy, having stabbed the neighbor who was caring for her with a fruit knife. Only when she realized she had injured someone did she regain her senses, crying out in fear. Jong-gu hurriedly comforted his daughter and called for emergency services. After the neighbors were taken away by ambulance, Illinois Guan, distraught, went to see police officer Jong-gu. Il-guan said that the day before yesterday, after returning from a trip to the mountain mountains with Jong-gu and Yang-jae to meet the Japanese man. He had been suffering from a persistent fever and terrifying hallucinations. Therefore, Illinois Guang suspected that the Japanese man had also cursed him. Upon hearing this, Jong-gu began to believe that the Japanese man was the cause of all the strange events. 2 days later, in the afternoon, the shaman whom Jong-gu's mother-in-law had invited finally arrived. He was wearing a suit, had his hair tied in a ponytail, and looked somewhat devout. As soon as the shaman entered the door, he discovered a dead crow in a jar of soybean paste that Jong-gu's house was drying. In Korean culinary culture, doang, soybean paste, holds an extremely important place. It is believed that the quality of homemade soy sauce is closely related to the prosperity or decline of the entire family's fortune. The appearance of a dead crow in Jong-gu's jar of soy sauce was now considered an ominous sign. The sorcerer then changed his attire and began performing an exorcism. During this process, Hyojin appeared to be in great pain. At the end of the ceremony, the sorcerer told police officer Jong-gu that the evil force possessing Hyojin was extremely formidable. The exorcism had only managed to temporarily suppress it. Furthermore, the evil mastermind behind the manipulation was a Japanese man living in the mountains. In reality, this man was not human, but a demon. The previous murders were caused by this Japanese man casting a curse on suspect Park and neighbor Lee, driving them insane and leading them to commit brutal murders. The Japanese man's next target was Hyojin, Jong-gu's daughter. To prevent Hyojin from falling into the same trap as suspect Park and neighbor Lee, they had to quickly set up a larger ritual to expel the evil spirits from her body. For this, Jong-gu needed to pay the shaman a fee of 10 million won. For a lowly police officer like Jong-gu, this was no small sum. However, to ensure his daughter's well-being, he agreed to pay. He just couldn't understand why the Japanese man kept targeting his daughter. The shaman replied cryptically that it was like fishing. A fisherman casts his line and throws his bait into the water without knowing what kind of fish he'll catch. Jong-gu was half understanding, half confused. That same afternoon, while Jong-gu's family was busy preparing for the larger exorcism ceremony, a third murder occurred in the village. A farmer named Dae-chun suddenly went mad and fatally stabbed his wife and 2 visiting neighbors. In his yard, Dae-chun had also laid out a list of sacrificial offerings, looking as if he had just finished performing a ritual. While the police were frantically searching for Dae-chun, the Japanese man living in the mountains was one step ahead. He found the killer's body in the forest. Dae-chun had died in his own car. It seemed he had died suddenly during a panicked escape. His face was also covered in festering sores. That night, the sorcerer began a large-scale exorcism ceremony in Jong-gu's courtyard. At the same time, elsewhere, the Japanese man set up an altar in his room and began a ritual. The situation was exactly like a magical battle across space with the sorcerer. Surprisingly, what was placed on the sorcerer's altar was a photograph taken at the time of Dae-chun's death. As the ceremony progressed, Hyojin was once again plunged into agony. Each time the sorcerer hammered an iron nail into a piece of wood in front of her, Hyojin let out a heart-wrenching scream as if the nail was being driven straight into her soul. Along with Hyojin's increasing suffering, the Japanese man also seemed to be afflicted by some kind of backlash. He was in so much pain that he fainted on the ground. The entire scene was witnessed by a mysterious woman hiding in the shadows. On the other side, Jong-gu couldn't bear to see his daughter suffer, so he intervened, forcing the shaman to stop the ritual. Unexpectedly, as soon as the ceremony stopped, the Japanese man, who had fainted, suddenly woke up. Jong-gu then rushed his wife and daughter, who was convulsing all over her body, to the hospital for emergency treatment. However, the doctors were still unable to find the cause of Hyojin's illness. They only gave her a sedative to make her sleep again. While his daughter was still asleep, Jong-gu went to Yang-jae that night to beg him to take him to see the priest of the church for help. However, after hearing the story, the priest said that he himself was also helpless. Cornered, Jong-gu finally decided to resolve the problem in a simple and violent way. The next morning, he sought out some villagers he knew well, including Yang-jae. They took shovels and hoes and drove up the mountain with the intention of using force to drive the Japanese man out of the area. Unexpectedly, when they arrived at the wooden house on the mountaintop, they found the Japanese man wasn't home. Suddenly, Dae-chun, who had died earlier, staggered into view. His eyes were empty, his appearance hideous. He bit anyone he saw like a soulless zombie. Jong-gu immediately led the villagers in a fight with Dae-chun. As a result, everyone, including Jong-gu, was injured, but Dae-chun didn't die. Just as Jong-gu's group thought they were about to lose their lives, Dae-chun suddenly convulsed and lost all ability to fight. Finally, he died with his bones twisted and broken. Before Jong-gu could even catch his breath, he saw the Japanese man lurking nearby, watching. Upon being discovered, the Japanese man turned and fled. Jong-gu shouted for everyone to chase after him. In his panic, the Japanese man ran past a cliff and slipped, falling to the ground. However, he didn't die instantly, but managed to drag his injured body to a secluded spot spot below the cliff. This scene was once again witnessed by the mysterious woman, who seemed quite pleased with the Japanese man's current predicament. She unconsciously broke into a malicious smile. Having lost sight of their target, Jong-gu and his group had no choice but to drive back to the village. While driving along a mountain pass, due to a moment of distraction, Jong-gu accidentally hit an object that had fallen from the sky. When everyone got out of the car to check, they discovered that the person they had hit was none other than the Japanese man. At this point, the man was covered in blood, lying motionless on the ground, seemingly dead. After a month of deliberation, Jong-gu's group threw the Japanese man's body down a ravine beside the road. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the sorcerer received another exorcism order. The client was an elderly woman who suspected her daughter was possessed and sought his help. Her daughter was the barmaid in the woolen coat with a prominent neck covered in pimples that Jong-gu had seen at the bar earlier. After Jong-gu threw the Japanese man's body down the ravine, he told the other villagers to go home. He then drove to the hospital to visit his daughter. By this time, Hyojin's mental state had completely recovered. Jong-gu was overjoyed to welcome her home. He thought the recent series of misfortunes would surely end here. Therefore, when the sorcerer called, Jong-gu resolutely pressed the reject button. Unexpectedly, that very night, a fourth murder occurred in the village. Shockingly, the culprit this time was Il-gwang. For several days prior, after seeing photographs of the murders at the Japanese man's wooden house, Illinois Gwang's mental state gradually deteriorated into panic. He eventually went mad and killed a neighboring elderly woman. When Yenje heard the news and rushed to the scene, he discovered Il-gwang covered in pus-filled sores. Yenje couldn't understand why these deadly events continued. Could the Japanese man still be alive? Thinking this, Yenje decided to go alone to the cliff where they had disposed of the body during the day to confirm if the Japanese man was still alive. Since the sorcerer couldn't reach Jong-gu by phone, he drove to Jong-gu's house. Unexpectedly, as soon as he got out of the car, he started bleeding profusely from his nose. Realizing something was wrong, the sorcerer looked around and saw a mysterious woman standing not far away. The mysterious woman then simply said one word to the sorcerer: "Get out." The sorcerer's nosebleed turned into violent vomiting. He then struggled to climb into his car, intending to drive away from the area. However, as his car was about to reach the county boundary, a large swarm of moths suddenly crashed into the windshield, nearly causing an accident. Meanwhile, unable to sleep, Jong-gu took out his phone. Only then did he realize the sorcerer had called him more than 10 times. Fearing the sorcerer had something important to tell him, Jong-gu decided to call back to inquire about the situation. Afraid of waking his wife, he quietly went outside. Before he could dial back, he received a call from the sorcerer. On the phone, the sorcerer frantically informed Jong-gu that he had made a mistake. The real demon wasn't the Japanese man, but the mysterious woman. The Japanese man, like himself, was actually a benevolent sorcerer. The man's purpose in coming to this land was to exterminate the white-robed female demon who was wreaking havoc on the people. The sorcerer's collection of photos of the victims was merely a ritual to appease the deceased. After saying this, the sorcerer reminded Jong-gu to check if his daughter was home. Hearing the sorcerer's last words, Jong-gu shuddered and rushed into the house to check on his daughter. Sure enough, Hyojin had vanished without a trace. While searching for his daughter, Jong-gu encountered the mysterious woman again. The mysterious woman presented an argument completely contrary to the sorcerer's. She told Jong-gu that the Japanese man was not dead because he was an indestructible demon. Furthermore, she was certain he would return for revenge. Therefore, Jong-gu absolutely must not go home now. Seeing Jong-gu's skeptical expression, the mysterious woman continued by saying she had set a trap to catch the demon right outside his door. Once the demon was caught, 3 rooster crows would be heard. By then, Jong-gu would be safe returning home. Just as the mysterious woman finished speaking, the sorcerer called Jong-gu again. He told Jong-gu not to believe the mysterious woman's demonic words and assured him that Hyojin had returned home safely. While Jong-gu was still debating whether he should return home immediately, the mysterious woman warned him again not to believe anything the sorcerer said. She claimed the sorcerer and the Japanese man were accomplices in the massacre of the villagers. Jong-gu was stunned by the contradictory statements from the sorcerer and the mysterious woman. His head was spinning. He didn't know who to believe. At that moment, a rooster crowed, bringing Jong-gu back to his senses. He then asked the mysterious woman the question that had been bothering him for so long. Why were the demons targeting his daughter? Jong-gu had previously asked the shaman about this matter. The mysterious woman's answer was completely different. She said that the reason the demon targeted Hyojin was because Jong-gu had suspected and intended to drive away the Japanese man. This was what brought misfortune to his daughter. Jong-gu obviously couldn't agree with her explanation. The reason was simple. Hyojin had clearly shown unusual behavior first, which was why he suspected the Japanese man. It wasn't that he suspected the Japanese man first, and then Hyojin's mental state became problematic. At this this moment, the second rooster crowed. Jong-gu was truly worried about his daughter, so he decided he had to go home immediately to check on her. But just as he turned to leave, the mysterious woman, who had been standing not far away, suddenly teleported right beside him and grabbed his hand. Jong-gu suddenly felt a chill run down his spine because the mysterious woman's hand was pale and icy cold, just like a demon's hand. In his panic, Jong-gu noticed a familiar-looking hair clip lying where the mysterious woman had been standing. It was exactly the gift he had given Hyojin a few days earlier. Furthermore, the woolen coat the mysterious woman was wearing was clearly the same one worn by the barmaid with the pus-filled sore on her neck. At this moment, Jong-gu remembered that the first time he met the mysterious woman, she was wearing a green men's coat. Thinking back, the name Dae-chun was embroidered on the pocket of that coat. Clearly, it belonged to Dae-chun, the one who had turned into a zombie. Only now did Jong-gu finally realize that the mysterious woman before him was the real demon. She had used the victims' belongings to cast curses upon them, causing them to lose their minds and unleash massacres on those around them. With this thought in mind, Jong-gu rushed home without hesitation. The moment he stepped through the door, the snapdragon hanging above instantly withered and transformed into the shape of a fox skull. At the same time, Jong-gu discovered the bodies of his mother-in-law and wife. His daughter stood beside the corpses, clutching a sharp knife, her expression lifeless. Meanwhile, in another development, Yangja found a severely injured Japanese man inside a cave beneath a cliff. Gathering his courage, Yangja approached and directly asked the man whether he was human or demon. The man extended his arm, telling Yangja to touch his face. He then told Yangja that souls have no flesh and bones, but he did. This saying, originating from the Bible, was spoken by Jesus to his disciples after his resurrection. Just as Yangja breathed a sigh of relief and lowered his guard, the man revealed his true nature as a ferocious demon. The following day, the sorcerer once again drove to Jong-gu's house. Hyojin, with a vacant look in her eyes, sat listlessly in front of the door. Jong-gu lay dying beside the bodies of his wife and mother-in-law. Faced with this horrific scene, the sorcerer showed no surprise. He calmly took out a camera and photographed each member of Jong-gu's family. After finishing, while packing his bags to leave, the sorcerer accidentally knocked over a box in the trunk of his car. The photos inside immediately scattered to the ground. These were precisely the photos of the victims that had been pasted on the wall of the dark room in the Japanese man's wooden house earlier. The sorcerer picked up the photos, put them back in the box, and calmly drove away. The film officially ends here, but leaves many unanswered and ambiguous questions. For example, who is the mastermind behind the series of murders? What is the relationship between the Japanese man and the sorcerer? And what is the true identity of the mysterious woman? The most common explanation is that the real mastermind behind the bewitching of the villagers and the serial murders is the Japanese man. He and the sorcerer are partners. One is responsible for casting spells to harm people, while the other pretends to perform exorcisms to extort money. The film contains many details that suggest the relationship between the Japanese man and the sorcerer is not normal. For instance, the sorcerer wears a loincloth identical to the one worn by the Japanese man. This type of loincloth, officially called a fundoshi, was the dominant type of men's underwear in Japan before the Second Reich. Of course, the most obvious implication is that the photos of the victims on the wooden wall of the Japanese man's house eventually appeared in the shaman's car. Regarding the important character who appears repeatedly in the film, the mysterious woman is actually a deity who governs and protects this land. The reason she wears the victims' clothes and carries their belongings is not to use them for evil, but because only by wearing these items can ordinary people see her. The demon-catching trap that the mysterious woman mentioned placing in front of Jong-gu's house was merely a string of snapdragon flowers hanging there. Jong-gu rushing through the door caused the snapdragon flowers to wither immediately, meaning the demon-catching trap completely lost its effect. This directly led to the devastating tragedy for Jong-gu's family. The film ends here. Thank you for watching, goodbye, and see you again.